Hey everyone, welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, and we are back in the saddle once again for another season. And I have with me, I think for the third, maybe even fourth time, comic creator Mike Barron. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
I am always excited to have you on. I've read Thin Blue Line, I've read Private American, and you have another book that is currently funding on Fund My Comic, Bronze Star. And so obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with that. It's a fun book to read. I'm excited to pick it up when I get my next paycheck. But before we get into too much of everything, what is the basic premise for those who don't know anything about it and are hearing about it for the first time?
Bronze Star. It's a supernatural Western. I've always wanted to work with Pat Broderick. And I said, Pat, what do you want to draw? And he said, I'd like to draw a supernatural Western. And that set the gears to clinking. I'm familiar with Westerns. I've written a couple of Western novels under a pseudonym, and I've been reading them all my life. So in many ways, it follows the classic trope of the Western in that it's a revenge story. But in other ways, it deviates completely, especially toward the end when it flies off the rails. It's about Harley Brogdon, a former Quantrill's raider who fled the United States and finds himself at a tiny town in the foothills of the Rockies in Canada. And the town is very simple. The town is very peaceful. The reason he fled the United States is because he killed a guy that drew down on him in a poker game. And the guy he killed was the son of a very powerful landowner who will stop at nothing to get his hands on Harley and torture him to death. So he puts a posse together and they hound Harley out of the country until finally he finds himself at Cobb's Gap, which is a remarkably peaceful town, especially after dark. And the reason is the sheriff. He's not just a great sheriff, he's got a curse. And during the full moon, he has to go away. Uh, and that's part of the story, but that's not the big reveal. Uh, Pat has delivered the greatest work of his career. Everybody who's seen those pages has been blown away. They're so intricate and detailed, and not just the characters. Pat is somebody who does backgrounds all the way back into infinity. So you have the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, which often consists of mountain ranges that are beautifully realized. And we have a terrific colorist in Robert Epps who's doing the job. I'll send you one of his colored pages here so that you can show it. Oh, this one we got. I'll put it in his Facebook feed.
Yeah. Let me just pull
Let's
it up.
see if I can find some of that. I'm looking for the background, the scenes. I don't have that page at hand. But here's another one. This shows a little of the background. This is an early scene where Harley is hunting meat for the army. That's what he does for a living. Plus, he plays a little poker, and that gets him in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up in 1 second. Actually, I could just pull it up right here. So that's I know cover A, and then I think hopefully I'm not going to dox anybody here too much. I think everybody can see that, in which that's sort of the background.
Yeah, that's just a hint of what is going on in the book. Oh, here we go. Here we go. This is the one you want to show.
Oh boy, I'm like doxing everybody's information right now, so
Well, how are you doxing their information?
it's all good. It's all good. Everybody gets
Okay.
to see my Facebook feed. Is what's
Oh,
happened.
oh, I see.
It's super secret, guys. It's super secret. But yeah. So to even talk about this though, and dive into the story, because it's interesting because it's got a tie of the Civil War in there, and it's a Civil War veteran, and then following that, obviously, an event happens. But I think that is sort of just the beginning a little bit, where the real story is when he comes to this town and why it's quiet at night, what's going on in this town, and how he's sort of reviving his life. in a certain way, and he's, I guess, having a rebirth of his life to some degree is how I interpreted it, where he got out, he finds a girl, he marries her, he's interested in her, and then the past is coming back to hunt him. And then there's sort of this whole thing that we get there where we get the issue at the beginning, then the middle is kind of peaceful, and that's kind of the second act, and then the third act, all hell breaks loose, and it's a Shakespeare play.
That's right.
And so what is that like? Because it's a real art to be able to do that and have a complete story in that fashion and have three separate acts that all go nice together. Because it is, I feel, in comics, a problem right now with storytelling.
Well, it may be, but that's because a lot of people working in comics are not storytellers. They're pamphleteers, or they got a grudge, got a big chip on their shoulder, and they think the comic is the means to convince other people of a particular point of view. Oh no, that's not the that's not the purpose of the comic. The purpose of the comic is to entertain. I never lose sight of that fact.
Did you also feel that at this point, people are also writing comics to pitch to Hollywood and pitch other projects, and they say, "Cool, a comic is going to run me $6,000, maybe $10,000, and I want to get a Netflix show that's going to make me 50 million." And you
Well,
feel
yeah,
that,
to a certain extent, but here's what puzzles me: if they're putting out a broadside or a Jeremiah, about support the Quagles or else, that's not story either. And it blows my mind that any Hollywood producer would take a chance on a book that's basically propaganda.
because for me, it's I want to escape. My life is hard. Everybody has a hard life, and I think everybody has frustrations. And I think that's one of the biggest problems right now is that I don't necessarily want to read. I don't need to read the next. I'm trying to think of the next great American novel is a good example to use. I need to read that, but I want a reason that's going to take me out for 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes out of my whatever messed up day I'm having that day. I think it's a real problem. And this is the type of story stuff that I think really does that because it's familiar, but it's also different. And that's what's cool about this book in particular is that I get that it's a Western. I get that, some guy made a decision and he has to leave town and people want revenge. But then we get the supernatural stuff in there. And so what is that like to have enough familiarity, but also back off and add a new twist to it to make it different? Because that's also, I feel, complicated right now in comics where there's a lot of books that I feel are all similar.
Well, it felt very natural to me because at this stage, I know how to write a story. I understand story. And if you understand story, you don't make a wrong turn. I knew what I wanted to do. As soon as Pat said, I want to do a supernatural Western, I thought, well, that's the sheriff. But that's not the big reveal. It's just, it's partially incidental to the story. It has something to do with the climax at the end. Because both the sheriff and the woman with whom Harley falls in love come from the same town in Croatia, which has traditions and legends going back millennia. And they bring that with them when they come to America.
Yeah, and there's something that happens with the mine and how the mine is sort of shut down, and then it becomes a mess of gunfight, supernatural fight, and I got a feeling that let's just say that the posse that's coming down is not ready to deal with a werewolf. Or yeah, I think it's a safe assumption here. I'm going out on a limb here. I don't think they brought enough stakes or silver for the fight that they're about to ensue and what's going to happen next. And so it's really just a fun thing. And it kind of, in my opinion, reads like a shonen fight anime scene that's about to occur in the last 12 pages of your book. And that's kind of what I want to read. I'm not going to lie. Like, I don't want something, and I can say this in the nicest way, I want something that's going to be entertaining. I don't want political agendas in my comics. And this just seems like an awesome kind of, we get 75% slow burn, and then in the last 12 pages, it's going to be all out war.
A fast burn. Would you show the video?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just pull it up again. Just give me 1 second while I pull it up. So yes, because the video is very good. We're going to talk about that too. So that's not what I wanted to do.
It is.
The Civil War was America's bloodiest conflict. Over 500,000 died to preserve national unity. When the war ended, Confederates like Harley Brogdon headed west, shooting game in the Army and gambling. When a card game turns deadly, Harley shoots in self-defense, killing threw down first. Wilfred Knorr, the card sharp's wealthy father, will stop at nothing to see Harley hang. Harley flees to Cobb's Gap, an old silver mining town at the foot of the Rockies. A remarkably peaceful town, especially after dark. But the sheriff harbors a dark secret, and no one dares go into the mines. Cobb's Gap is full of secrets. People speak in hushed tones of something in the mine. Something worse than their cursed sheriff. Something even the Indians fear. Tired of running, Harley falls in love with a local widow with secrets of her own. But when Knorr's posse arrives seeking vengeance, the stage is set for a showdown with unimaginable horrors from the deepest pits of hell, and every secret will be exposed. Eisner winner Mike Baron and acclaimed illustrator Pat Broderick present one of the weirdest westerns that Comic Dom has ever seen. Bronze Star, a thrilling tale of love, revenge, and supernatural terror from the minds of two legendary creators. It's not the monster you're looking for. Order your copy at bronzestarcomic.com.
So let's actually talk about the video. And the reason why I want to talk about it is that I think it's really important at this stage. There's a lot of good comics out there. There's a lot of bad comics too, but you have to earn my dollar. And it's not just you have to produce a good book anymore. You have to produce a good concept. And I think you have to market it and you have to convince me. And I think it's super important as far as videos and imagery and other things. And so what is that like? And I know that you work with people that help you to do this and that you have somewhat of a team behind you. But what is that like? Because this definitely helps to convince people, I feel, to know what they're getting and also catches their eye. Because if you watch it, that's a trailer and makes your pitch, a sales pitch in a lot of ways. And I think it's really important. And I think it's a lesson that a lot of people can potentially learn is that you need to kind of sell your book.
Well, Chris Brawley puts our videos together, and that's why they're the best videos on crowdfunding in comic books, period. Because Chris is a professional videographer, and he knows how to get the best talent, like the voice talent. We were lucky to get Sam Elliott to narrate that trailer. It's not really Sam, but he sure sounds like him. But the other thing is, when you understand story, as I said, you don't make a wrong turn. I have 3 rules in writing. My first rule is it's my job to entertain, and that's the most important rule. And you'd think, well, duh. That's why people go to movies and read comics. You'd think that should be obvious. But from the output that's coming from the traditional comic manufacturers and from Hollywood today, it's obviously not obvious because they're putting out product that doesn't entertain. It just repels people. I never lose sight of the fact that it's my job to entertain. Well, how do you do that? It's my goal to grab the reader by the throat and drag him into the story to the exclusion of all else. How do you grab the reader by the throat? The most important question in fiction is what happens next. And because if the reader doesn't care, he's not going to turn the page. Well, how do you make the reader care? There are an infinite number of ways. I'm just going to touch on 3. It's number 1, you create a character who's so fascinating that he's irresistible. And Sherlock Holmes is my example of that. Everybody loves Sherlock Holmes, and he's so popular. He's more popular now than he ever was when
Conan
Doyle, thank you, when he was alive. There's probably 10 times as many Sherlock Holmes stories as when Conan Doyle was writing, maybe 20, maybe 100 times. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has written 3 books based on Mycroft Holmes. But there are a lot of fascinating characters. Obviously, Spider-Man is a fascinating character. I mean, he has inbuilt appeal. You can squander that by bad writing over the years, but it takes a long time. James Bond is another character that people love. The second method of grabbing a reader's attention is to give them a scenario that's irresistible. And to me, Jurassic Park is the archetype of that scenario, because who can resist a park where people interact with live dinosaurs? What could go wrong? And the success of that franchise speaks for itself. And the third method that you grab a reader's attention is to use a seductive narrative voice. This is not so much in comics as it is in straight prose, but it does apply in comics as well. When Alan Moore was on top of his game, the words, every word he put down counts, and they're memorable. You come to that point in Watchmen when they're locking Rorschach back up and everybody's screaming at him, and he says, "You don't get it. I'm not locked up in here with you. You're locked up in here with me." And we all remember it. That's the kind of thought or blurb that resonates and stays with you a long time, that could only originate in comics. Like, it's clobbering time. We all know who said that, and we all know who created that, and it's become part of our general conversation.
Yeah, no, because it's really interesting in this realm. And I look at stories, and I'm a selective buyer now. For a few reasons. A, I'm running out of space to store everything. And B, there's a lot of shit out there that's just bad. And I work way too hard for my money to not, pick up good materials. And this is what I'm looking for. And it's so interesting because when this video comes out, I know exactly what I'm getting, and I'm now intrigued. And I think it's a driving force. It's also the first thing people see. It has sort of a motion comic element to it, which I also think helps as well. And, you need to get somebody into the top of your funnel. And I hate to say this, but whether it's Kickstarter, Fund My Comic, Fund My Indie, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, Zoop, whatever it is, it's all a funnel. And you need to get me into your funnel. I'm going to click your video if I didn't know you and it came across my desk. First thing I'm going to watch, if I'm interested, is that video. And that's going to either make me want to go down or leave the page. And that's something that I think is really important. And that's why I think, you're where you're at in this book. And I think Private American did the same thing. I think Thin Blue Line, partially because of the video.
Well, one of the things we also do is we create a unique URL address for all of our products. thinbluelinecomics.com. If you missed out on the campaign, you can get it there. theprivateamerican.com, same thing. All my books are available. floridamancomics.com, and now bronzestarcomic.com. Chris creates these unique URLs that are going to be up there in perpetuity, so that people can find them. And we also, there's some controversy about these crowdfunding sites, and I've been the recipient of their hostility over lies. But that's one of the reasons Fund My Comic was created, was to create a site that was friendly towards creators, because some of these sites aren't so friendly, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. Indiegogo has shadow banned virtually every Comicsgate creator. The campaigns are there, but unless you get a direct link to that specific campaign, you can't find it. You go to Indiegogo, you type in Private American by Mike Baron, it won't come up. Why do they do this? We suspect it's little bureaucrats, anonymous bureaucrats who are like the people who edit modern comics and write modern comics, that come in with a specific point of view and a big chip on their shoulder. And they're afraid not to go along with their mob. And their mob says, we are only friendly to these progressive ideas. Well, progressive is a misleading term, because I think we've been regressing the last couple of years.
Progress. It's interesting you bring this up, because I actually haven't spoken about this. I saw a lot on eBay. And what's actually happening on eBay is they're starting to crack down on comic books that are a little suggestive and covers that are a little suggestive. And
well, what do you mean? Do you mean sexually suggestive?
So a girl who's topless, even if it's covered up, they're cracking down on it. So and they're saying, oh, it's suggesting nudity, it's suggesting this, and they're going through a major renovation. Now, there's a million ways how to get around that, but that didn't exist a year ago. And so there are a lot of weird changes happening in comics. And I don't think it's just on these crowdfunders. I think that there's some other pressure out in the world. And I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I've seen it on Kickstarter, I've seen it on Indiegogo, and I've seen it in other venues where comics are being sold. And I feel like they're being cracked down on extensively. And it's a very weird thing that's going on. And that's why something like Fund My Comic is so interesting. And obviously I had Luke on, who's part of that whole team. I think it's his baby. And we spoke about this for like an hour and a half and talking about it. But it's so interesting because I think that comics in a lot of ways are the cheapest form of expressing any story at this moment. And I think that certain people fear it. I think corporate, America fears it a little bit. I really do.
Well, I think you have a point there because there's a certain group of people who are trying to control the narrative, and they don't want anything out there that goes against their view of things. But there's some other things to consider about comics in particular. One is print media is dying. But those of us who collect comics, we want print media that we can hold in our hands. It's part of the magic of the comic is when you're holding a comic with a great story and an illustration that draws you in to like an alien landscape or an ancient city. There's a magic that happens that just doesn't happen on screen when you're looking at it digitally. Another thing to consider is the distribution system is in complete chaos and has been for over a decade. Diamond used to have all the work, but now all these other distributors are stepping in, and some are exclusive and some aren't. The third thing that's affecting comic readership that's never discussed is the rise of video games, because the fact is that a good video game like Grand Theft Auto or something like that contains a lot more value for your dollar than the average comic. You know what I'm talking about. And that brings up Sturgeon's Law. Theodore Sturgeon was a great science fiction writer, and he said that 90% of everything is crap. And he was right. And that's Sturgeon's Law. And that doesn't go just for comics. It includes novels, TV shows, movies. 90% of it is crap. And anybody who's into pop culture knows this is true. That the good stuff is rare and it's in demand and you have to look for it.
Yeah, no, I agree that. I mean, look, I like playing video games and I enjoy playing video games, and I played games that are giving me hours, if not hundreds of hours of entertainment for $60. And I like comics. I read a lot of comics, and I'm not saying, but when you're charging me $5 a comic and then I read it in 15 minutes, I mean, the value, it's complicated. And then half the time I buy a book, it's a piece of shit, like for lack of a better word. And I'm like, did I just spend $5 on this book? It took me 10 minutes to read it, and I have a problem. And then I think also I'm going to add a fourth point. I think manga is destroying comics in a way as well, where I have been going to Barnes & Noble almost every weekend for the last 20 years of my life. And I have noticed the manga section at my Barnes & Noble slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger.
I've noticed that too.
And it's like an inch here, it's an inch there, and it's an inch there. And you're like, holy shit, how did this get 9 shelves out of here? You're like, and I'm not complaining because I like reading manga and I read a lot of it. But at the same time, I think that also has done damage to comics, where I don't think comics have answered back.
No, they haven't. And for reasons we've gone over before, like people don't want an agenda. They want entertainment. Too many comics deliver an agenda, and too many comics are written by people who don't know how to entertain. They're polemicists. They haven't really worked their way through to create a style and to create a point of view. And it's one of the things that makes a good writer is the ability to inhabit every point of view, any character, regardless of their race, creed, sexual orientation, whatever. When people say, oh, you can't write the perspective of an Eskimo because you're not an Eskimo, I always say, should Shakespeare have been allowed to write Othello? It's an absurd question. There can be no blinders on the American imagination. These little gatekeepers out there who are telling you what you can and cannot do based on your ethnicity, over which you have no control, they're full of shit. It doesn't matter. Let people write what they want and let the market respond. If they write bad stuff, people aren't going to buy it.
Yeah, my favorite thing, and I'm a big Californication fan, is that Hank says in an episode, he says, "Run your idea up a flagpole and see who salutes back." And what I took that to mean is that throw your idea out there and let's see how people respond to it. And if people like it, who cares if you wrote something weird and trippy? If you wrote about, some vampires, some gay vampires, and it's the next biggest thing, and you're making millions of dollars and people want to read it, I guess the market responded and they like it.
Anne Rice.
I threw out the most ridiculous thing I could think of because that's the point. Is that? But there you go. And but I digress. I do want to talk about one more thing, and then I want to talk about Fund My Comic because I think that's really interesting where you're at with that. But what I like about this book in particular is that it's 48 pages, and I had a professor.
It's longer than that. Actually, it's.
I stand corrected.
What the main story is 49 pages, and then there's a 10-page short story at the end that I'm not going to say a thing about, but it's going to blow your mind. And Pat illustrated that too. So the story consists of at least 59 pages. There might be 60, I'm not sure. And then we have a lot of pinups to add.
I stand corrected, but I think my point is still the same, where there is an art to writing short. And I had a professor in DC where he basically said you had 1,000 words to write your assignment. I don't think people understand that 1,000 words is not a lot. No. And when you're writing for the government, and the theory is that, and basically what he wanted us to do is that he wanted to write assignments that were 25% of our grades over 4 of them in bullet points, because you're handing it to a congressional member of Congress and they have 2 minutes to read it. What's the point? And there's an art to getting your point in a very short
Absolutely. That's my whole thing. I have to correct myself. The code is only 8 pages, but it's still going to be a big book. I offer, I have a Substack column. It's mikebaron.substack.com. And I wrote a column called What's Your Story About? And I urge everybody who's not an established pro to read that column, because it's one of the most important questions you're ever going to be asked. And when it comes, you have to be prepared. You can't wing it. You can't make stuff up when you're asked that question. You have to work it out beforehand and write it down. I do that for all my projects now. And if you want to know what it looks like, go to Amazon and look up your favorite thriller writer and read the publisher's blurb. And I always recommend John D. MacDonald, especially his Travis McGee novels, because that's why I'm writing. I was inspired by those as a child. And one day I had just bought my first John D. MacDonald novel, and I was standing on a sidewalk in Mitchell, South Dakota, looking at it. It was 35 cents, brand new. And I had this revelation. Well, this guy's not writing this for his health. He's doing this for a living. That's what I want to do. And so the seed was born. It took me a long time to get there, but I did get there. And when I write the blurb for my books, I get the essence down. And there's a whole bunch of tricks to doing this. Use the active voice. Do not say a decision was made. Name your protagonists and give them a little bit of characterization so people know what to expect, and then hit the high points. And every time I look at a blurb that I've written, I find a way to pare it down even further. And they're not necessarily super short, but most of them are less than 1,000 words. Some are 500, some are only 250.
No, I just like short things in which that I like no wasted movement. I've watched like 4 perfect shows in my life. Breaking Bad is one of them. 91 Days is brilliant. So 91 Days is an anime about revenge. Takes place in 91 days. And they have a recap episode on a 12 episode of anime, and you need it. It's the first time I've ever seen a show have a recap episode that wasn't wasted, that replayed the first 7 episodes. And I was like, this is kind of stupid. And then within 5 minutes, I'm like, I get it. And then when episode 8 hit, you're like, oh, I get it. And then there's been a few others, but I don't feel like mentioning them. But it's really an art, I feel, to write something short, to the point, no wasted movement. And there's nothing out of place. And it's great. But I do want to touch upon one more thing before we get to Fund My Indie, and this is something that I think you've done also well that the big two have failed at, and that is you give your artists and the people you work with equity in the project. And I think that's something that is really important because I think people have to give a fuck about what they're writing and they need an upside. Meaning that if you don't own Batman and you're writing for DC, are you really going to give a damn about what you're writing if you don't own anything you created? And I think it's a real problem. Me and Ben Dunn were speaking about this last Wednesday. And I think it's a real problem in comics right now with the big two is that if I create a DC character that they're going to make millions off of and I don't own a piece of that, do I really care about that character or writing something significant and having a run with a particular character for Marvel, DC, or hell, for Image, or any character that's owned by a corporation? So I think that's something that's very interesting that you do with your projects.
Well, it's a good point. I don't do it with all projects. Some projects I'm working with artists. I have a dog.
It's okay. I have a dog too. It's fine. Nobody's criticizing the dog. I get it. My dog could bark at any point too. It's all good.
What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the artist. I do that on certain projects where I know the artist is committed and is not going to flake out on me. I used to do it without a contract, and I made some very serious mistakes in my career by offering equity that people who eventually became unsuitable or who betrayed me or who went crazy. So now everything is done with a contract. But of course, with Pat Broderick, it's been a dream marriage. Pat's all in. In fact, he's already begun to work on the second issue, which is another supernatural Western that goes in a completely different direction. But you said there were 4 shows you thought were perfect. You named 2 of them. What are the other 2?
I'll make an argument on sort of one of them. I thought that wow, my mind is slipping. Wow, I'm really bad at this today.
Oh, I could name a bunch.
It's technically not a show; it's a movie. Wrath of Khan, I think, is perfect. I would make the argument that Wrath of Khan is perfect. So that's 3, and then I actually thought Inception was pretty close to perfect. I really did think it was pretty close to perfect because I thought the ending really raised questions on what's going on here, and I thought it was really, really well done.
Oh, someday perhaps you can explain that to me.
What, Inception or Wrath of Khan? Because
Inception. I got Wrath of Khan. But there are a number of shows that I think are nearly perfect. I'm watching one now. It's called The Unit, and it's based on Inside Delta Force. And David Mamet created it, and he's written a lot of the scripts. And it's the most realistic military series I've ever seen. Better Call Saul. You mentioned Breaking Bad. I think Better Call Saul is even better. Deadwood on HBO. Loved it. The Sopranos, The Wire. These are all brilliant shows that grab me by the throat every episode.
Succession is really good. Succession, that's really good. But yeah, no. The Sopranos is brilliant, and the ending, so good. That ending was brilliant. James Gandolfino, way too soon. But yeah, no, it's so interesting. But again, that's I mean, I understand the Inception might be controversial for some people. They can deal with it though. I understand, but
I like a linear story.
I like stories that are trippy, and I like stories that go full circle and raise questions, and then can have a deviation path. But I like that. But that's just me. But I thought Wrath of Khan is arguably one of the most perfect movies ever created on so many levels. But I'm a big Star Trek guy, so there you go. The only problem, which makes Wrath of Khan has only one problem, where if you didn't see the episode where Khan was introduced into Star Trek, it's a problem. Where beyond that, that's the only deficit of Wrath of Khan. But I digress. Enough about that, because that's not about your book. I want to get back to your book, and I want to talk about coming to Fund My Comic. because I like Luke. Luke's been on my show 5 or 6 times now. And what has this been like? Because it's obviously picked up steam.
Well, it was one of those things that had to be. It was a necessity of invention because of what the established crowdfunding sites were doing to us. And I'm sure you know that this insane Harridan wrote an article for the Daily Kos, a far left hate site, attacking me. And the headline was Mike Barron releases another racist AF comic book. And she has never read anything I've written, nothing. It was filled with lies and suppositions. And then she started calling on her followers. Everybody write Kickstarter and tell them to get this racist comic book off. And she succeeded. And I went to that article. I was looking at the comments today and said, yeah, we got to get this white supremacist off. It was just fucking lies. For one thing, the protagonists of A Private American are second generation Cubans. And the reason I did that was because people who come to the United States legally and succeed here are often far more patriotic than people who are born here, especially into a life of luxury. These people, the newcomers, they understand what the United States offers. And every day, hardly a day goes by without another visitor from Venezuela or Korea or China warning us that this is the reason they fled their home countries and it's happening here.
Yeah, so to even go further into this, in which that obviously this is a way more friendly environment. And me and Luke were speaking, that interview's out where Luke does gatekeep a little bit, where he does sort of vet people who come on and off because it's his baby. And it makes sense that, I hate to say this, but you have to somewhat gatekeep. I gatekeep on this show. I don't think there's anything wrong with gatekeeping to protect your interests. I think it becomes an issue when the whole industry is gatekeeping.
That's right.
I think individual gatekeeping, because there's certain people that I don't want on my show. No offense to anybody, but it's my show. I pay the bills, so I get the call. But what has this been like that you don't have to worry about being shadow banned on this platform?
That's right.
And it sounds like a weird thing. Now, that doesn't mean that Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or TikTok can't do something, but the actual platform itself won't touch you and won't block your content unless you violate their terms. And then I think those are pretty clearly outlined. And I don't think this does anything near there. So what is that like that's not a worry for you, that you could be raising $5,000 and then all of a sudden they pull the rug out from you? Because
that happened to us with Crowdfunder. And then Chris interviewed the president of Crowdfunder, and he said, we will not have anyone associated with Comicsgate on this platform. But why is that?
Because I think that, sorry, you go. What were you saying?
Oh, there were a lot of people, as soon as Comicsgate was created, they said, I'm Comicsgate. No, I'm Comicsgate. It was like the end scene in Spartacus, where everybody was claiming to be part of Comicsgate, to grab on to Ethan Van Sciver's shirt tails and get a lift from him. But a lot of them really don't have the temperament to interact on the internet. You know what I mean? They start getting in fights with each other and food fights and calling people names and trying to get each other doxxed and so forth. And that's unfortunate, but that occurs in virtually every mass movement, certainly on those on the left. The difference is the left doesn't police their own ranks.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not Comicsgate. I interact with Comicsgate. I'm just an interviewer, and I like to interview everybody. So I am Comicsgate friendly. I am not Comicsgate friendly. I just want to talk to everybody in comics because I love this industry more than anything else. And this industry has rewarded me in a lot of ways, both, personally and financially. So I'll speak to Comicsgate. If Comicsgate somebody from there wants to be on my show, more than happy to interview you. Somebody who hates them wants to be on my show, more than happy to interview them too. Because I am a free speech advocate, and that's where I stand. So, but I agree that I am not a fan of the infighting and the doxing. There's been incidents, and we don't need to go through them, but there's been some significant ones that are pretty bad that have happened at a Comicsgate that are not, I guess, endorsed. But anyway, enough about that. But I think it's really interesting because I like what's going on with Fund My Comic. And obviously, you're somewhat of a big name in comics coming over there, and it's a big deal to them in a lot of ways. That
Well, yes and no. I mean, there were like 10 years there. I couldn't get any work whatsoever. I had to take any job I could. I worked as a janitor.
but it's kind of cool because what you're known in the comic realm. Every time I shoot out to somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, Mike Barron's coming on. People are like, oh, Mike Barron's coming on, and it's always like people are always happy when I interview you because people know your work, people know your work on the Punisher, people know your work from Thin Blue Line and a bunch of other stuff. And so, what is that like now that you have a platform that's friendly to you and that's supportive of you and that's going to be appreciative of you in a lot of ways? Because it's kind
Well,
of
I'm
a
very grateful. I'm very grateful and happy and surprised. I'm very surprised at this career, at my career, that this sudden taking flight at my age and being more popular than ever. And I do have to say that one of the reasons is that I've been continued to improve on my writing. And that's one of the things that keeps me going. Writing is a joy to me, especially when I write a scene that I know works. There are two moments of happiness when I'm working on a comic. The first is when I write something that just clicks and I know it clicks. And the second is when I hold the finished product in my hand. As I said before, if you understand story intuitively, then you're not going to make a misstep. You don't write these long digressions that are going to say, oh, I like those words, but they have nothing to do with the story. And then you got to take them all out and start all over. That no longer happens. A lot of young writers say, is this any good? Is this any good? Oh, I don't know. I need a beta reader. But when you reach a certain level, you don't wonder. You know that it's good. And that doesn't mean that a really great author can't publish the occasional clinker. We all make mistakes from time to time. But at this point, writing is a pleasure to me, and I look forward to it.
No, it's interesting, and obviously, I feel, and I'll use EVS as an example. I think what happened with EVS is that he worked on Jordan Peterson's book, and he did some illustrations for that book. I think the 12 Rules of Life, the first one, and obviously that got EVS in some trouble, but then it also shot him out and sort of revived this career. And I don't know if it was the right move, the bad move, whatever it was. It's not important, but one of the things is that I feel like there's been this movement forever with people who aren't, fit in the box. And I think political boundaries and identifications have moved around significantly. Where I think the left has moved more left, and the right has moved in 15 different directions. A bunch of people who were on the left have been pushed out of the left.
You're absolutely right. Matt Taibbi, for example.
I used to be on the left. It's like I got pushed out because I was a free speech advocate.
That's right.
And I'm like, I was a blue dog Democrat, and now I'm libertarian lean right. And that's not a secret because I legitimately was pushed out. I didn't change. They changed.
Virtually every groundbreaking journalist today, and I'm including Matt Taibbi, and there are many like him, was at one time a celebrated leftist until their eyes opened and they saw what the left was doing. And they said, well, I can't perpetuate this lie anymore. Men cannot get pregnant. That's just one crime. And once that happens, they're shunned. And the left turns on you. It's not enough to shut you out. They will try to destroy you. They will try to remove your a way to make a living. It's happened to me. It's happened to so many others. You know that the IRS raided Matt Taibbi's home on the day he went on the air to discuss some unfortunate facts about the Trump indictment or whatever.
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy, and he's not the only one. And I mean, it's a wild world we live in. But I really do not want to get raided by the IRS. So that does not seem like a fun experience.
Well, they did it because he testified before Congress.
Hey! I'm sure he was ready for it. And
it was about the Twitter files.
I love Elon. I love Elon so much. In so many ways, but there's so many things I can talk about. That's so off base.
Yeah, he
But
certainly upended the scene. I thank God for him.
I mean, I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for Twitter to start a war with YouTube because it's coming. If you don't know by now, Twitter is going to become the next big video platform, and everybody who's relevant is going to be on Twitter, and it's coming, and when it comes, it will come off like a wave, and it's going to be so interesting.
Well, yeah. Let's get back to comics because I have a pipeline of stuff that's coming out.
Yeah, you do have stuff that's coming out. So I don't know all the stuff that's coming out, but I know that you got Thin Blue Line. If you want that, that's available. I know Private American or The Private American. I have that. Bronze Star is obviously on Fund My Comic, which is the best place to get it. Florida Man, I think it went to second. Is it in third print yet? One of them?
Well, you brought that up, and I have to say, starting with Bronze Star, all these projects their sole purpose is to entertain. It has nothing to do with point of view. After Bronze Star comes Florida Man graphic novel #2, and that's fully illustrated. It's even funnier than the first. We're really excited about it. After that comes the Nexus graphic novel illustrated by Kelsey Shannon. And I don't know if you've seen his art, but Kelsey's work on this Nexus book is going to make your mind explode. Kelsey also recently completed a Nexus graphic novel that Dark Horse will be releasing next year. I can't wait for that one. That's really special. And Richard Bonk, who illustrated Private American, is now working on Sherlock Holmes meets Captain Nemo. And I would love to show you some of the art from that. In fact, I think I will. It's going to blow your mind.
Yeah. I'm just gonna wait. Did Richard Bonk do work on the Bushwhackers book?
I don't know.
He might have. He might have done some work on the cover for that.
Which book?
It was the Bushwhackers autobiography.
I don't know the Bushwhackers. Who are the Bushwhackers?
They're these wrestlers.
Oh,
it's. I don't know if you're being sarcastic with me. It was. I don't know if I walked into like a joke there, but
Bonk worked on Witchblade. And he also illustrated Nexus Nefarious, which Dark Horse published last year. And if you need copies of that, where is that book? Here it is. You can order these on Amazon. You can order them from your friendly neighborhood comic store. And if you exercise all other options and can't get it, you can also write me. I have a handful of copies. I just sent you a page from the Sherlock Holmes Captain Nemo book.
I pulled up one of them. I don't know if this is the one we're talking about, or if you're looking.
No, that ain't it. That's Pat Broderick. It's the newest thing. There it is at the bottom. Yeah, look at this. Richard's just exploding on this. I think he has hit his sweet spot with these steampunk Victorian science fiction novels. And that's what it is. But it's also a traditional Sherlock Holmes story. It's going to scratch that itch if you love Sherlock Holmes. It's going to scratch that itch if you love Jules Verne. The story is going to blow your mind. It's one of those stories I wrote it and I thought, that's too perfect, you know.
So what is that like for you? Because I've had in my career maybe 2 or 3 perfect interviews where everything was perfect in that. And for whatever reason, me and my guests were just clicking in and out, in and out, in and out. And it was unbelievable. And I don't know how to describe it, but like it worked, right? And I've had plenty of good interviews. And I'm like, oh man, I feel really good about that interview. But I know when an interview is going to work. And I could tell from the first 3 or 4 questions in how it's going to play out. And what is that like for you as a writer when you're like, man, I know how this is going to hit? Because sometimes you don't, right?
Well, I don't forge ahead if it doesn't please me. If it clicks, then I'll have a revelation. That's why I keep a notepad and pen next to my bed. The other night, I was working on a graphic novel about a zombie invasion. I know ho-hum, but believe me, this zombie invasion is different. When I suddenly had a revelation, how it was going to end. And I immediately got up, turned on the light, grabbed my notepad, and wrote it down. And then I was able to finish that graphic novel with a bang. It's called Battleground Suburbia, and it's about a zombie invasion flowing across the southern border. This is the next wave, and how all these people who moved out into the country to these pricey estates suddenly find themselves cut off from all civilization, struggling for survival. And it's about the type of personality who helps them survive.
It's going to be interesting. That's going to be interesting. I have a theme song, but it might be tough to get it. The Flyover States by Jason Aldean is the perfect song for that. Great song by him. Great song. So
What's
relevant.
the song?
Flyover States by Jason Aldean. So the song is really talking about Kansas, Oklahoma, Indiana, and he's talking about how, the people fly from New York to Los Angeles, and they're flying over all these states that are sort of, not really recognized. And that's sort of, middle America. And
That's
the
right.
country. And we live in a countrywide, guys. It's a big country, America. But anyway, I digress right there. And obviously you got a lot of stuff coming out. And then I just really want to talk about also, you got cover A, which is cool. I know you got cover B. I think you have the artist edition, which I think is a nice one. I don't think you've done an artist edition on Thin Blue Line or the Private American. So this is kind of cool.
We did do one on Thin Blue Line.
I stand corrected. But what is that like? Because it is different to read a book in black and white.
Well, for one thing, it's bigger, and a lot of people like that, especially when you get intricate art. And for Pat Broderick, it's a natural. We had to do this in black and white. And I should mention that the response to Thin Blue Line was so overwhelming that we're doing a second issue. In fact, it's already written. And my artist, Joe Arnold, who's a full-time police officer, has penciled about 1/3 of the book. At the same time, he's working at least 40 hours a week as a cop, and he's also working on several other graphic novels. I don't know where Joe sleeps.
So even to talk about that, because, and I know you mentioned it before in another interview with me, it is important, I feel, to have expert opinions when you're doing a book like Thin Blue Line, where I think it is important to have police input, cop input, law enforcement input, and other input too. Obviously, even as civilians' viewpoint on that, because sometimes, you just want to make sure that things are appropriate and that they're viewed correctly. But what is that like to have a police officer being your main illustrator on that? Because it does add some, I think, credibility. It adds some, I guess, expertise to it. And it also, and I hate to say this, I'm going to break, and kayfabe it out, but it becomes a marketing point, I feel, as well. Saying, hey, this is done by a police officer about a cop interaction and a scenario with law enforcement.
Well, one of the things is that jiu-jitsu. Joe is a jiu-jitsu master, and the book contains some jiu-jitsu scenes which are drawn in an accurate and exciting manner. Also, Thin Blue Line will be released later this year as a floppy one-shot edition from Antarctic Press. So it's going to be in comic shops, and we're excited about that. In fact, we're trying to do that with all my books, which has trained me to write graphic novels that can be divvied up into at least 3 separate floppies, which have at least 22 pages apiece. We did that with Florida Man.
That's how I read Florida Man, is in the floppies.
We might be doing that with Private American. We're certainly going to do that with the next Florida Man.
No. It's interesting because I think a lot of people in comics don't know how to run a business in comics. And I run an eBay store where I buy and sell books. And I haven't created a book, but I understand that business side. And I think a lot of creators don't understand that going to Antarctic Press That's just
Well,
distribution.
Antarctic Press is doing Thin Blue Line. American Mythology published Florida Man, and it was their biggest seller. They're a small publisher, but they get around.
But it's gravy on top, because if you kickstart it, or you then do that, you Indiegogo it, whatever, you fund my comic or fund my indie, whatever you do, you get your Kickstarter money, you have your personal distribution, you go to cons, and then you get into a place like Antarctic Press or American Mythology or a small publisher, then that's further distribution and further gravy on top. And I
Yeah,
think
and it draws attention to the line too. A lot of people picked it up that had never heard of American Mythology, but had heard about Florida Man. In fact, everybody has heard about Florida Man. That's the reason I wrote the book. It was a novel first, and there are 3 Florida Man novels out that I've written. They're all on Amazon, and I'm going to write another. I already got the idea for it when I find the time, which I hope is coming up.
And so I think it's interesting. And I also think that, it's your brand, where Mike Barron, whether we want to admit this or not, and I understand that I might be off base, so tell me to shut the fuck up at any point. But when you do Florida Man, then you do Thin Blue Line, then you do Private American, then you do Bronze Star, then you do Nexus, all of a sudden you have developed a brand. So if Florida Man is selling out like crazy, so he's like, cool, I like what Mike Barron does with this book. What else is he doing? And if you're in Antarctic Press, and then you're in American Mythology, and then you're in another one, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if Nexus is ever going to be published by somebody, or maybe Dark Horse, I think you mentioned, is doing the graphic novel. So now you're a brand, and you're a draw for an audience to go to all those places. And I think that's something that a lot of comic creators don't understand either.
Well, thank you. I'm all over the place, obviously. I'm doing horror, humor, noir, crime. But the one thing that connects all my work is I think it's really well written, and that's what people are looking for. It's exciting stuff. You're not going to get bored. You're going to, once you pick it up, you're going to want to go straight through to the end, which is what I try to do. Is, as I say, I always try to grab the reader by the throat.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. I think it's important. And obviously, there's a bunch of other stuff that I could talk to you about. I'm sure that when something else comes out in a few months from now, I'll get you back on.
That'd be great.
But I definitely want to ask you one thing outside of all this. Where do you think the industry is going as far as comics and all that stuff? Because especially on the indie scene, because I think it's very complicated right now. And the short answer, not the long answer, because I think it's very interesting what's going on. I think we're at a very pivotal point.
Well, at one level, I have no idea. But as you know, it seems to me that the major publishers are circling the drain because they're not entertaining. At the same time, we have this world of crowdfunding, and it's a mixed bag. A lot of people are crowdfunding their books. Sturgeon's Law. A lot of them aren't so good, but some are really good, and they're finding an audience. If you want to follow the industry, I recommend ICV2.com, Internal Correspondence Volume 2. It's ICV2.com, which is a daily newspaper about events in the hobby industry, focusing on comic books, games, and movies. And for the other perspective, I would recommend BleedingFool.com. Which presents comics from a conservative point of view, as does Bounding Into Comics. And by that, I merely say they present all sides of the issue. They don't have an axe to grind like so many of these websites do.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, I'm not familiar with any of those, so I can't really speak on that. But I'm going to check it out, and I've never heard of any of those. That's interesting to me. But obviously, I do want to give you a chance to self-promote yourself. Where could people find you, bother you, check out what you're doing, all that fun stuff? Because it is important. I mean, I put the links up in the description and the comment sections down below to your book, so obviously people get access it there, and a bunch of other stuff. But I'm going to let you have the floor.
Well, thank you, sir. You can find me on Twitter at Bloody Red Baron. You can find me on Facebook as The Comics and Novels of Mike Barron, and also Michael A. Barron. And you can find me on Substack at Mike Barron. I also have a couple of other sites that I don't have right now. I have to dig them up, and I'll send those to you later.
And then I've just been saying it. I've been saying it for almost 4 years. 4 years that you have to support indie. And what that means is that you need to buy comic books from people you like and indie creators you like. And particularly when they are crowdfunding on whatever site they're crowdfunding on, you need to support their books if you want them and you want them to see more of it get made, because that's how things happen. Furthermore, let's say that book is not your cup of tea, but you want to support the creator, you could buy another of their book, maybe because that will indirectly support them. Or furthermore, if money's tight, everybody's been there, following people on social media, interacting with social media, sharing out campaigns, all that stuff matters. It makes a huge difference because, again, a share sometimes is worth just as much as a pledge, and it could be just as effective.
Later this year, all my works will be consolidated at a new site, barroncomics.com. And Andrew, I want to thank you so much for supporting my work. I appreciate fans like you and what you're doing. Thanks for the signal boost on Bronze Star. Get it at Fund My Comic, and we'll talk again in a couple of months, maybe less.
Yeah, and I was going to quickly promote myself. I am Pop Anime Comics on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Feel free to check it out. I appreciate everybody who supports what I do and all that stuff. Again, I cannot promise on YouTube with my 500 plus interviews that you will get smarter, but I can promise that you'll be entertained, and there's an interview for you out there. And if there isn't, well, God help you. And on that note, everybody, that is a wrap.